I've played tons of games, and one thing that I've noticed is that there's always going to be distinct variances in what is offered to the consumer. We have puzzle games, we have action-adventure games, games based on board games, games based on movies, but today, I'm following up with a request from one of our epic viewers, Mike Mayberry7121, who last month suggested the worst 8-bit games based on superheroes. Now that involves playing every superhero game on multiple 8-bit consoles or whatever iterations came out, and I think that this is a qualifier, right? So I'm gonna mix it up a little bit. I'll be doing one of these for every single system, right? We're gonna have the top 10 worst on the Sega Master System, top 10 worst on the SG-1000, but today we're gonna cover the NES. So here we are, that's the topic of today's episode, my top 10 worst NES games based on superheroes. Now, the one thing I want you to understand is that the idea of a superhero, to me, it goes a little bit beyond Marvel, right? So we're gonna have a little bit of a variety here. That being said, let's begin. Well, this one is interesting. I guess at some point, Lucasfilms wanted to be relevant in the comic superhero world, and they did that with an incredibly absurd concept involving incredibly unbelievable superheroes that make as much sense as trying to fish with a shovel. We have Miss Megawatt, she can do electrical stuff. Jet Headstrong, who shoots his head off like a rocket. Buzzsaw Girl, who's the product of some weird kinky home improvement shit because her legs were replaced with buzzsaws. But I'm impartial to the sentient hammer known as Toolbox. Yeah, when I played this game, I chose Toolbox because when else am I going to play as a walking hammer? Well, unfortunately, no matter how novel this game is, the level progression is horrible and the hit detection is even more terrible. I spent most of my time trying to hit the enemies, and most of the time, I couldn't. And that's a key aspect of this game, especially one that presents itself as a pseudo-brawler. For anyone of the era, you might recall a show about this too, an animated show, because it's one of those dick shows. I think it's pronounced deek, but I think it's funnier to say dick because I'm an immature little boy, and that's okay. I would show you the footage so that maybe you could remember it as some repressed memory, but WildBrain acquired all of the Deke IPs that we loved in the 90s, and they are total dicks when it comes to copyright striking people on YouTube, so unfortunately I can't show it here. You know, I love RoboCop II. Really, the entire RoboCop franchise has been pretty badass. And because it's badass, you already know what the prophecy states. One cannot create a movie game unless the patron saints of buffoonery, Saint Acclaim, Saint LGN, and Saint Ocean get their tithes. And that's basically what happened. Out of the bullshit triumvirate that was those companies, Ocean happened to pick up RoboCop. So yeah, you already know where this is going. But guess what? It didn't have to be. Data East published this, but they outsourced to Ocean for development. What the fuck? Now, if we dive a little bit deeper into the company that developed this game, it was actually developed by Painting by Numbers on contract from Ocean, a company so great that they aren't even credited in the game. Lots of red flags here, huh? Well, we play as a squatty goon version of RoboCop, walking to the right and shooting people. It's a very run-of-the-mill run-and-gun, and if you've ever played a game with Ocean's influence, you can recognize it a mile away. A great potential ruined by lazy developers who were provided amazing artwork and great music. Typical run-of-the-mill Ocean jank. Now, RoboCop 1 wasn't that bad. RoboCop 3, not a fan, but RoboCop 2, it's just bullshit to me. Well, we have our first official superhero, at least from the Marvel perspective, Wolverine. Now, I love Wolverine. I've always loved Wolverine, so even though I knew I was in for what many might consider a no-knock colonoscopy, I was still kind of excited to check it out. After all, this was made by Software Creations, which usually, when you hear me say that, I'd immediately scream, motherfucking Tim Follins, right? But this isn't actually Tim, it's his brother Jeff. I want to be excited, but unfortunately we lost Jeff this year to a battle with cancer. and in many ways, he was just as talented as Tim. In fact, Wolverine's soundtrack is likely the only good thing going for it. He'll be missed. Now, back to the silver platter of sadness that is Wolverine. It's a very basic platformer with our favorite 80s era Wolverine. Judging by the cover, it's from his self-titled comic run, specifically Wolverine issue number 27. And you want to know what drives me batshit insane about this game? If we use our claws, we lose our health. To have our claws out means sacrificing our health, and that alone made this game completely unworthy of my time. If they would have left that one little detail out, I think the game would have been generic, but certainly not on this list. Oh well. Now this one is motherfucking Tim Fallon's! In fact, yet again, as par for the course for software creations, we have an absolute dildo of a time supplemented with one of the best soundtracks on the NES, at least in my opinion. How nice of Tim Fallon to give us a free game when we buy his soundtracks. This game is brutally unfair. Not hard, unfair. There's a difference. Many times when I talk about how difficult a game is, it's based on what we deal with versus what we are capable of, right? Think of Ninja Gaiden. There's tropes we contend with, but with practice we can learn our capabilities and execute them. Not with Silver Surfer. For starters, you need to blow out your thumb to keep up with the enemies. Second, the things that can kill you in this game, it's kind of trial and error to figure it out. Sometimes you don't know what is technically a boundary, and I'm pretty sure I died to a rubber duck once. The hitbox is unfathomably large, and you know what? It's insulting that someone imbued with the power cosmic, someone with superhuman strength, telekinesis, telepathy, fucking intangibility, and the skills necessary for damn near instantaneous interdimensional travel, dies from a fucking rubber duck! I can't be alone on this one. This game blows some serious peen. But that being said, if you crank out an NES Advantage or really any turbo controller, you can beat this one. Well, this is an interesting one. At least it had the potential to be interesting. Nightshade itself, it's a superhero game, but ever so barely. When people ask me about Nightshade, I tell them it's Beam's attempt at bringing a point-and-click to the NES, and they didn't do it well. The whole idea is that this idiot named Sutek, his true name being Waldo P. Schmear, which sounds like a diagnosis for incontinence, has taken over the underworld. Basically, the key superhero Vortex, he gets killed, so we play as a vigilante known as Nightshade, and our whole objective is to go around taking the law into our own hands and helping the community. I really wanted this game to be better than what it was, and the main reason why so many people turned away from it, even though it was a Konami game, was because the controls were way too convoluted. And I guess in some way, Konami had hopes for it as well, because it was named Part 1, but we never saw Part 2. It was the right game, don't get me wrong. It was the right game on the wrong console. A few more buttons, it would have made a big difference. Remember that movie where Liam Neeson is a weird guy who breaks a dude's finger over a teddy bear at the carnival? Yeah, that's what I remember from it. And quite honestly, I think being the recipient of said finger manipulation techniques likely would have been more fun than sitting down and trying to beat this. Now, Darkman itself, it was a short story written by Sam Raimi. He's the guy who created the Evil Dead franchise, the original SpiderMan trilogy, a bunch of stuff, right? And that short story turned into a really fucking weird movie that turned into two really horrible follow-ups that never got rented in Blockbuster. From the first movie, though, we had a game. Want to take a wild guess who made it? You know you have a 33% chance of getting it right. Here's your options. Take your time. No rush. Got your answer? If you chose C, Ocean, you're correct. And guess what? It was developed, yet again, under license by Paint by Numbers, the same people who messed up RoboCop 2. The music is horrible, the artwork is nothing to brag about, and the gameplay is boring as boring can be. It just really wasn't for me. So when I tried to figure out exactly what games were superhero games, I googled tons of names. I asked ChatGPT, I went to Moby Games and tried to find a grouping that covers it. And finally, after all that, I went through a full NTSC collection of box arts. And the one that popped up a few times through all of those options was Werewolf: The Last Warrior. And I don't really know if it counts as a superhero game, but we play as Werewolf, the super werewolf. And we get superpowers from picking up red W's. And if we're a werewolf and we need to be human, we can pick up blue W's to weaken our werewolf nature. It's a very run-of-the-mill beat-em-up. It almost reminds me of Altered Beast with extra steps, and also on a less than practical console to do it on, the NES. Now, if you're a human, you're fucked. If you're a werewolf, you're kind of fucked. But if you're a super werewolf, you're alright. But the problem is staying a werewolf is hard, right? The game itself is difficult, and it doesn't help that the controls are horrible. Stodgy at best. And with bad controls, playing a game that is cryptic, nail in the coffin for me. It's a game that if you want to master, you're going to need the patience of Hachiko the Akita, right? Remember that dog that waited for its owner at the train station? That needs to be you. I make fun of Acclaim all the time. I also make fun of LJN all the time, and they deserve it in my opinion. But did you know that Acclaim bought LJN? Often I talk about shadow companies, right? Ultra and Palcom are really Konami, and Tengen is really Atari. But when you think of LJN, bear in mind that it might come from an era where Acclaim owned them, specifically 1990, and SpiderMan Return of the Sinister 6 was released in 1992 for the NES, so yeah, it falls in that time frame. Now, fundamentally, I appreciate what Bits Studio always tried to do. To me, Bits Studio was a group that really tried to do stuff well, but they never pulled it off, right? Like, they were the equivalent of your child walking up to you and showing you a picture that they drew at school, that they perceive as being a dragon shooting flames, but it kind of looks like a supremely oversized wiener shooting fire. And as a parent, you say, "Oh wow, great job. We'll put it right on the refrigerator." And when they aren't looking, it mysteriously disappears. That's Bit Studio. They took scraps from the table, tried to make things work, and oftentimes it didn't. Now, in the hour that I played this game, I found the animation to be okay. I was actually impressed by it. It kind of felt like a very subpar DOS game downscaled to the NES. But the major issue I had is that it's tremendously slow. Every action that you do is ridiculously slow to the point where you lose interest in it rather quickly. I did beat the first stage, but it wasn't fun. This is a trend that you'll see with early superhero games. Companies relied on buzzwords, the fads of what kids wanted. They had high returns with zero regard for consumer confidence, and that stuck for a while. In many cases, it would take a lot of time to make a good, solid superhero game. I was beyond frustrated when I popped this into the emulator. I love Superman. For many of us, he's the first stop in our journey to understanding superheroes and what they're capable of. And if you were me, he was indestructible, the coolest thing ever. He had everything you could want in a superhero. Super strength, ice breath, laser eyes, he could fly. He was the superhero. Now, luckily for me, my first Superman game was Superman 64, which probably played a critical role in my clinical depression. But if you happen to live in the 80s, you might remember Kimco's horrible attempt at making a Superman game. Superman, or Clark Kent, is a goofus in this game. He can jump, good for him, so can I. But at least there's some semblance of gravity when I jump. Not in this game. Oh, and all of those superpowers that I named, he only has them when he's in his Superman costume, which we can get into if we hop into a phone booth. But if we take too much damage, we revert to Clark Kent, which makes no fucking sense. Even if you do manage to stay as Superman, you'll find quickly that your superpowers are used in very oddly specific situations. Take flight, for example. You don't know where to use it, and if you use it in the wrong area, you shoot up into the sky, wait 5 seconds, and then you land with no change in scenery because you didn't do it in the right area. To me, it's a stupidly cryptic game, and it didn't need to be that way. Even talking to the NPCs is a chore. They talk to you like a 3 a.m. inner city crackhead. There's nothing beneficial to it. So you're constantly looking for just a smidge of direction, and unfortunately, you will never get it. This is a major pass for me. and I don't think you'll like it either. But if you do, you do. I personally don't. To imply that this is a game is to suggest that hot potato with a hand grenade is a game, that underwater shark tag is a game, that being audited by the IRS is a game. From the moment I booted it up, I knew that I was in for a bad time. Want to know why? We don't know who developed it. Some say it was Pixel, which good luck finding anything about them, or Both Tech. But Both Tech isn't a bad company. You might know them as well. They rebranded to Quest Corporation and then they created the Ogre Battle series. And historically, they weren't bad. They weren't great, but they weren't bad. They weren't one of those companies that said, hey, let's put a sticker on here that says it's an X-Men game and then let down an entire generation of gamers bad, right? No matter who made this game, on a fundamental level to me, and this is rare, so fucking cherish it, this is one of the worst games that I have ever played on the NES. And I believe it is one of the worst NES games out there. And I also believe it's a high contender for one of the worst games ever created. There's zero method or madness to what to do. The AI for our partners is the equivalent of strapping a Beanie Baby to our hip and expecting it to become sentient. It's a horrible time. I don't even think the folks who made this knew who the X-Men were. Maybe they thought they're just people who wore X's on their shirt. It would make more sense. I'm telling you, this game alone is shallower than the gene pool in Alabama. It fucking blows. Do not play this game. In fact, burn it. Make Ray Bradbury write a book about it. Burn it. And that's it for today's episode. What did you think of it? Were there any games on this list that let you down as a kid? I'd love to hear it down below, and I know the community would as well. Speaking of our community, we're gathering of phenomenal folks who love to remember a time when life was just a little bit easier to live. And if you made it to the end of this episode, you're already at home in our community. We're currently working towards 8,000 subscribers, and if we accomplish that milestone, I'll make a special episode of the community's choosing. Finally, the single most important thing you can do for me is to hit that thumbs up button, as it directly impacts the visibility of the videos and the projects that I work on every single day. As always, from my family to your family, good energy, good vibes. Fortefyre out.